so I'm Zach Hawkins. I work with many awesome people at MediaCurrent. We build stuff, Drupal websites. And here's links to my slides, and actual links that are on my slides, so you don't have to download PDFs. And let us get started then. All right, so today we're going to go over reviewing lessons learned the hard way. We're just going to go over an intro to SMACSS and BEM, and we'll discuss theme architecture and how they all fit together. We'll look at actual code too, so that'll be nice. We'll be using SMACSS and BEM with Drupal and kind of look at how we can fight Drupal into doing what we want it to do. And we can also, we'll talk a little bit about refactoring current or inherited projects to be less awful. So you may have an old project or inherited project and you're like, man, I sure would like to do some SMACSS and BEM, but all this stuff. We'll talk about that too. So writing CSS is easy. Looking after it is not. I mean, this is CSS, right? So at the beginning, the blinds go up and down. And then before too long, and you come back to it, and you're like, I just want to add this one thing. Man, I wonder if I can delete any of this stuff. I better not. I might break something else. So lessons learned the hard way. So true story here. Whenever I was looking for bad code, I was looking at recent projects. And I was a little scared of like sharing code that I found because it wasn't code that I'd written. But then I was like, wait a minute, I've got plenty of horrible code that I've written. I'll just share that. So this is from like 2008-ish, back, pre-SMACSS or anything like that. That's not compressed CSS. That's not compiled or anything. That's me writing it line by line. Like, look at those IDs. Footer, foot rated, H4. I mean, ID, A dot class. I mean, my goodness. Yeah, it's insane. What was I thinking? So obviously, as I found, I had difficulties modifying projects without regressions. You want to change this, all of a sudden it affects something else you didn't mean for it to change. I couldn't delete anything because I didn't know what was affecting what. So all of a sudden, because of the cascade, styles were affecting components, and I couldn't delete this because of that without wrecking the whole site, and ran into specificity issues. So here we had to nest deeper and deeper and get more and more specific because we're having to override IDs, and someone just finally is like, forget it, just throw an important at the bottom, call it a day. And then that happens like 8 times. Yeah, that happens like 8 times, and then you're like, oh man, now I gotta like nest that with another important. Oh man, and then organizational issues. So how often have you come to a project and you're like, oh cool, there's the styles.css, and you open it and it's like 8,000 lines. And there's like no telling what's in there. It is insane. So, and hatred of oneself is the last thing. So, and I'm so guilty of this, right? You look back at your old project and you're like, oh man, what was I thinking? Just like in this case, what was I thinking? And handing this off to somebody else, maybe like on a team or a client, like, here you go, don't look at any of the CSS. But yeah, let's try to avoid that. So SMACSS, if you're not familiar or have heard the term before, stands for Scalable and Modular Architecture for CSS. Jonathan Snook is the one that originally came up with it. There's a lot of very similar concepts. This is kind of the one I like, and this is the one that Drupal 8 has adopted. So all this stuff we're talking about today is Drupal 8 core. So smacks.com, they've got a book. You can read a lot of it there on that website. And BEM, which will work together with SMACSS, stands for Block Element Modifier. And these are the websites. The nbem.info is the official one. It's horrible. Don't go to it. I can't understand what on earth it's trying to say. The CSS Tricks BEM 101 one is much better. That's more practical as far as like, hey, here's what BEM is. And then Yandex is the company that came up with the naming convention. So let's look at how they fit together. And really, they're just style guides, right? Like none of this affects anything. It's just a style guide for you to write something so that later on you're able to scale it and maintain it easily. So SMACSS is comprised of base, layout, module, state, and theme. So base, which would be, we'll talk, I guess we could go ahead and talk about that. Base, which is like your base styles. So without any markup applied to it. well, we'll just go over that later. But let's look at how they tie together, because with block element modifier, you can tell, like, with Drupal, that's going to get annoying. And SMACSS, it has a module right there in there. Like, that's annoying. Like, with Drupal, uh-oh, we've got some conflict. So the Drupal version is slightly modified. So instead, we call it base, layout, and components, which components would be the same thing as modules. We just don't call them modules because Drupal. And then components, that's where the BEM comes in. So a component is made up of a block, the BEM block, the element, and the modifier. And we'll look at examples of those. State and skin theme. State is more usually like JavaScript related. So if something is expanding, that's where you'd have a special class for like is expanding or something like that. And then skin would be, we don't see this very often, but for example, I don't think anyone ever does it, but if you used to use Yahoo and they let you like individually theme your own stuff, that is skin. So it's purple for everyone else, but for you it's red or whatever. All right, so here's how BEM is made up. This can be anything. This is the meat of your website. So this is your carousels, heaven forbid. This is your media blocks. This is your call outs. These are the little pieces that are components that make up your website. So media block, just the class name, would be the actual component. Media block underscore underscore image denotes an element of the media block. So media block underscore underscore image is saying that, hey, this piece only works with this component. So this is an element of this component. If you use this class anywhere else outside of media block, it'll look busted because it's not meant to work with the other one. And the double dash is a modifier. So that's saying like, hey, this is media block, but we need a slight variation, and we don't feel like it deserves its very own new component. So as you can see here, and well, kind of see here, the very top level one, all I have there is really just a clear fix. That's the media block, so that's their component. And then I have the underscore underscore image, and you can probably guess that's probably applied to an image or an image wrapper, and it's floating it to the left with a margin right and so on. And then I've got a modifier that if I want it to float to the right instead, I can just apply that class alongside the media block, and then all of a sudden, yep.
On the media block image, you don't have a place in curly braces, is that because the modifier, or is that just the thing?
It's at the very bottom where it says image display block at the very end. That's where it's closed at. Yep. But good catch, good catch. And why I'm doing that with image display block and also media block underscore underscore image display block is because of Drupal. So I can apply this to a wrapper that has an image in it and still use it, or apply it directly to an image and it'd work the same.
Is there a reason you wouldn't do media block underscore underscore image dash dash reverse versus what you've got there?
Well, if I need to apply other stuff to it, I'd rather have it at the top level rather than trying to find that little element that makes up the component and apply another class to it, if that makes any sense. And we'll look at some code later too. So, and the warnings here are like, don't go crazy with elements, because I've seen some pretty impressive selectors like media block underscore underscore image underscore underscore this very one underscore underscore first underscore underscore odd. I mean, there's no sense in that. It's really just for you and for anyone that's looking at your markup in classes to see like, hey, media block image, I'm relatively sure that this is piece of the media block component. I'm relatively sure that I can use these classes together and they will work. And if I split them apart, they will not work. So warnings, don't go cray with elements. Yep, I talked about that. Don't try to match the DOM. Yeah, that's bad news. And it is what you want it to be. So if something makes sense to you, that's what I go by. If it makes sense to you, that's totally what I would do. You can get as complex or as simple as you want it to be if it makes sense to you. And if you keep a consistent naming convention, it is what you want it to be. I mean, because CSS will do whatever, just like JavaScript, like semicolons, I don't care. in CSS, we'll do whatever. So it's up to you to kind of make it do what you want it to do and to kind of enforce it on yourself. So now we're getting into SMACSS. So base, which is the default styling with no classes applied. So no IDs, no classes, definitely no importance. This is your reset, or this is your normalize. If you use like a CSS reset, we use normalize and use that. That is base. And layout, this is your actual layouts that make up the page. So there's some confusion here as far as like, hey, where do you separate that component and where do you separate that layout? I found that I just use layouts for the big things. So the whole page, header and footer. I usually have a layout for header, layout for footer. And if it's like an image that needs to float one way or another, I don't use a layout for that. That's just all componentized right inside that little component. Everything that component needs to work is within it. And everything that I need to give like a 3-column layout, here I go. As you can see here, we're prefixing it with an L, and that's just to separate it a little bit. So if we inspect an element in like Chrome Inspector and we see the L dash, we're like, oh, okay, cool, that's layout related. I know that I can go look in my Sass, go find the layout folder, and there's all my layout classes. And if there's not an L, then we're like, oh, okay, cool, that's a component. We're gonna look at the folder for all our components and go down the list until we find the one that matches. And if you do a good job of naming the partial or the Sass partial exactly what the component's name is, it makes it super simple. Then all of a sudden it's alphabetical order. You're like, M for media block. There we go, there it is. Easy. So layout, header, footers, and grids, reusable page layouts. I mean, I guess header and footer aren't super reusable, but I still usually break them up into layout. And also helper classes. So I usually throw in a L-centered, which just sets a max width on something, and margin 0 autos it, if that's a verb. And L-padded, just to give multiple elements a little bit of padding as needed. So components, that's the Meteor site. That is all the fun stuff. Navigation bars, callouts, and so on. And that's where we use BEM to help break everything up. So we can actually tell what pieces make up our components. And I guess I should also say that you can see too, because we have a super specific class name, there's very little nesting. There's nesting for that modifier there. But besides that, because the class names are so specific, we don't have to nest a lot. So because we keep all our specificity on that one level, classes, no IDs, just classes, it's super easy to override. So that modifier, I know it's going to work because, I mean, we only have a class on it. So keep everything as unspecific as possible, I guess. That's a very good question. All right, the media block reverse, within Sass, it's telling it, I want you to spit out whatever I'm nested inside at the end. So this would compile to media block -- reversed media block image. Yes, with a space.
I'm used to seeing it a little bit. Okay.
Yep, you can use it on either end. Yeah, it's super helpful. And I also have a demo, so we can look at that real quick. Yay. Oh man, this is horrible. Yep.
So, you've got all these different files that you're feeding into CSS. What goes into your main CSS file?
What goes into your main CSS file? Okay, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked, Paul. We'll actually look at, man, this looks really horrible. Okay, you can't see any of that, man. Look at that. That's fantastic. All right, so here's what it looks like. This is part of those links that I showed you guys earlier. If you want to actually look at it on your own computer. So let's look at some actual markup. So this is our callout component. You can tell it because I've got a nice class name there called callout. The JS toggle is prefixed with the JS so that you know, or a developer knows, or whoever comes in knows that, hey, this is very specific to JavaScript and it's not styling related at all. If I remove this, JavaScript will break. And the L center just tells the component, hey, I just want to center you on the screen, that's it. And as you can tell just by inspecting this markup, like, hey, callout heading. I'm relatively sure that that's probably the heading around the callout. Callout title. I'm pretty sure that that's probably related to the callout as well. And as you see, because we have these super specific names, class names, that it's easy to trace it back. So if you were to inspect any small part of this piece and see the class name on it, you could be sure that you could trace it all back to that one component. So if you ever wanted to delete this callout piece, you just delete all your callout related styles and no problem. Shouldn't affect anything else. And oh man, I'm sorry you guys can't see this better. Yeah, so the box sizing bit, that would be your base. So that applies to everything. This is your actual component. So, and I've got a modifier for night to just give it a different background color if you applied that class to it. And yeah, good stuff. But check out the code pen, it's pretty neat. All right, so what does that mean for us? Like, what do we actually get? Because we put ourselves through a lot of stuff here. Like, what do we get out of it? Well, it's super easy to navigate. We've got everything broken up. We can inspect the DOM with like Chrome Inspector and find the class name, go look at the Sass partials and like, oh, I know it's got to be a component. It's nothing else. Oh, look, they're all in alphabetical order. Oh, look, they're all, their own partial. So M, media block, there we go. That's what we modify. Need to delete it? No problem. No style collisions? Need to delete it? No problem. Avoid specificity battles? So we don't have to worry about being super specific to override X, which is overriding X, because we're keeping our specificity on that same level. So it's super easy to override. No worrying about like importance, this and that. It's easier to recycle, reuse, or repurpose. Like, hey, I wish I had a media block, but man, I sure wish that image floated on the other side. I better create a whole new component. Stop right there. Let's just create like a little modifier class, float it on the other side, still have the same component, still looking in one place. You're reusing the rest of the code because you only needed to modify it slightly, and it is what it is. It promotes consistency. So that goes back to the easier to reuse, recycle. You're like, hey, well, we already have these button components. Let's just reuse those instead of creating a brand new one. And because all of our CSS is compartmentalized, we can stick this wherever we want on the site, and we should be able to achieve the exact same design or the exact same look. So because we're not saying, if this is in the header, do this. If this is in the footer, do this. You can move it wherever you want to. So it's easy to hand over. We've got everything broken up. Anytime you need to modify anything, inspect the DOM, follow it back to whatever it is. No source maps needed. And we still include source maps on our projects, but I found myself like not using them at all. And Paul, it's time to look at code. Alrighty. So let's see. Ooh. All right, so this is just a little sample theme that I threw together, kind of based off of a recent project we've done. Oh man, that's so cramped. Wow, look at that. Okay, so we'll look at this first. All right, so I've got my Sass folder, got my base stuff in here, and within that base is just the HTML, box sizing, and so on. I've got form-related stuff, buttons, whatever it is. This is basically normalized that I've broken up into partials just so it's a little more easier to read. Media, this is just normalized. That's all it is. All right, so and then let's look at this level. Like Paul was saying, like, hey, how's all this like pulled together into the same file? All right, so in our main.scss file, this is where we're importing everything together. So this will be compiled into our actual CSS file. So at the very top, I've got it nice and documented, so you know what it's doing. Look at it. It's importing variables and mixins and no CSS. So that's just configuration for Sass so that we can use our variables, mixins, and so on. And that file is actually pretty neat. I picked this up somewhere along the way. But anyways, because we're breaking out all of our like utility imports, so our variables and colors and so on, and I've also got my vendor stuff up here too. We're using breakpoint and singularity for grid. Because we're breaking that all up into another init.scss, if I ever had to create a brand new CSS file, I could just import that init at the very top and have access to all my Sass variables and mixins and stuff with no CSS added. So that's why it's broken up like that. Let's see. Yep. So importing our base, importing our layout, and importing all of our components. And at the very end, we have shame. And let's talk about shame real quick. So there shouldn't be anything in shame. There shouldn't be. But sometimes there is stuff in shame. And that's because stuff is broken on the website right now and someone is mad. And that's where it goes. And it's here in its very own partial, sitting on the exact same level that init and your main style sheet is, or your main Sass file is, because it's reminding you, like, hey, this needs to go somewhere. This can't sit in here. Whenever we have time later, and after the crisis is resolved, we need to come back and take a harder look at this and see how this fits in to our normal theme. Yep, so we've got all our add imports and layouts, all named exactly the same class name that are there. Class name matches the partial name. That's key. If you can take anything away from this, class name matches the partial name, like, that's perfect. You'll love it. It's fantastic. So as you see, I mean, we're kind of keeping it consistent. Call to action buttons. Wow. And you can see this little yellow dots on the side. That's my SCSS linter yelling at me because it's not the right format it expects it to be. That's my fault. That's another talk. I won't have to talk about that now. All right, let's see how we're doing on time. All right, cool. So that's nice. But Drupal? Like, how do we get Drupal to do what we want to do so that we can have this nice, scalable, modular CSS? Well, that's a good question. If you had asked me this question at Drupal Camp Asheville, I would have given you this. I would have told you to do work, son. You have to want it. And here's like stuff for you to Google. Yeah, I did tell you that. And I gave you a list of stuff to Google. So because we had time and I was able to kind of fly through the first part, let's actually dive in a little bit into like how we can actually do this. So first, let's talk about base. And all these links should be provided either within the slides or within that big list of links file that I sent out. Your base. Unset the contrib CSS and add them as partials within your actual theme. This is fantastic. And it's easy to talk a good game and then not do this, but I found myself, like, by doing this makes my life so much easier. So all of a sudden, when you have to override the default Drupal messages, styles, it already exists within your theme. So you're just changing it there. You're not having to override Drupal provided CSS. So +1 on that. This is how I usually do it. If you use Omega 4 will let you, it has it built in, it'll let you do it and exclude it as well. The magic module will also let you do it. Yeah, let's get that out of our base styles and and within our control and within our theme. So the meat of the site. So components. First of all, TPLs. I've come full circle on TPLs. I used to hate them because I had like 5 billion of them. But I've come on full circle, and now I'm kind of like, hey, if I need to throw a TPL, I'll throw a TPL in there. No problem. And with theme debug, and if y'all didn't know about theme debug, did any of y'all know about theme debug? No? Okay. He knows. The rest of you guys, all right, now you've got your money's worth. Like for today, y'all can go home because that's it right there. All right, theme debug is awesome. Turn theme debug on, and this is the type of markup you get. Oh, man, you really can't see that, but it's giving you every TPL file that it would possibly expect, and it's telling you which one it's using. So as you inspect the markup, you can say, that's the one.
That gives you the ones you're using only, or the ones that you can use all?
All of them. Yep. So it will show a list of the possible ones, but it will also show which one is being
Here's your
used.
tip jar.
That will work on 8?
Here's your tip jar.
Isn't it?
8 has the same thing built in. This was been backported from 8 to 7.
Okay.
Is there a difference? Oh, this is the 7. Okay, that's what I was gonna say. There's a
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I was looking at it. This is what I find on YAML.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, this has been backported from 7 to 8. I just found this out like, I don't know, maybe 5 months ago. It came out in a Drupal release and wasn't really championed very much, but yeah, go forth and prosper, because that's awesome.
Your settings PHP.
I throw it in my settings PHP because I've got a local settings.php, and that's just so that it only applies to my site, and I can be sure that it never gets into production. But also, like, you know, yeah, anyways. So, theme debug, yes. Use fences to clean up markup. I may do this. This is one of those things that's kind of nice to have, but if you're not applying like classes to them or styles to them, then it doesn't really matter. I mean, as long as you can get relatively the markup you want. I mean, in a perfect world, yes, I would have exactly what I wanted and nothing more, but we don't really live in that world. So I have what I have, and as long as I can keep my custom classes, I can make sure that I have something to work with, and I can still be sure that it's pretty modular and like easy to scale over a long period of time. And I just found field formatter class to add classes to fields, so that's super sweet too. And here, this example of this markup is, I've got theme debug turned on, I've got fences cleaned up, all this field stuff. You can see there's just one div that has the field dash, whatever the field is, and then I've got my custom, you know, BEM-ish class. And I've got links to all these models and stuff too, so. Views. We love views, don't we? Views spits out such wonderful markup. Okay, so I prefer to use custom view modes with custom TPLs with fields, and then use something like the field formatter class to put a CSS class on it. If you don't know about view modes, I'd advise looking into it because it's pretty neat. It can apply across lots of different content types, and so instead of selecting within views, instead of selecting like, hey, I want the fields output, you can say, hey, I want the view mode output, and I want this one, I want this like teaser, or teaser's a stock one, let's just say teaser vertical or whatever. And then you've got a custom TPL for that, and you can either add your stuff there, your fields and markup and classes you want, or use something like field formatter classes to apply fields to it. You can use the global field plus token hack. This is the quick and dirty way to do it. People hate this way, but it does work. So the idea is you've got a ton of fields in a view, hide them all, add a global text field, change the admin name so it says something other than global text field, so it says something like, you know, custom HTML, and then add in your markup you want there with tokens for the other fields. So the only one that's actually rendered is that global text field, but it gives you the markup you want. Quick and dirty. Some people hate it. If you do it, go all the way or go home. Like, don't just override like 1 or 2 or 3 and kind of keep it inconsistent, but always just like do them all. Put a nice big admin name on it that says custom HTML so people know. Semantic views module. I've used this once. Should probably look into it more, but it will let you kind of clean up the views output and put actual classes on it. I've got a little note here on the bottom you can barely see that says also views hates underscores. So you know those awesome BEMing classes? Yep. Can't do, well, you can do that. It just converts it to double dashes instead of double underscores, which is fantastic when you're trying to troubleshoot stuff. Why isn't this class applying? That's why. So you'll see in some of my code, I've got my class name I want, a comma, and then underneath it, the class name with double dashes, and then a comment above it that says views is converting all of these to double underscores. Oh man, let's see if we can find it. Yeah, there we go. Yes. view strips out underscores. So that's why we're doing that. So that's nice. Just so you know. Log that away somewhere back in your memory. And more. So CTools content type plugins are fantastic. I'm not the expert on that by any means. That's more developer land than me. But at the bottom, you can see that we're defining the variable names. Oh man, you really can't see that. It's right there. And at the top, we've got our custom TPL with those same variable names just being spit out within the markup we actually want. So I've got a link to an article on how to build them in a little bit more in depth, but they're super awesome. Panels, add them to a pane, call it a day. Theme hooks and functions. So I feel like that's kind of like the default one, right? Oh, just write a preprocess function to add another class to this. I mean, I always have to Google it whenever I need to do it. But yeah, I have had to do it, but we try to keep that kind of down to a minimum. If you're using TPLs and preprocess, it gets kind of weird, like, hey, where'd I look? But I mean, I guess we always have find in folder and grep. So that's kind of nice. All right, so layouts. We use panels. If you didn't, I guess it would all be TPL files anyway. But we love panels. Panels is awesome. So this is a plugin definition for panels. And at the top, I've got like the actual definition. And there I'm defining my regions, like left and right region. And you can barely see it. I've got some other stuff that doesn't really matter. And then at the very bottom is the TPL. So I've got my own custom classes exactly where I want them to be. I've got printing out my regions, making sure that they exist before I print them out. Yep, exactly what I want, exactly the markup I want. And this works the same for mini panels as well. So a lot of the times with header and footer, I'll create that as a mini panel. That way I can get my custom like L-footer classes on it and a layout that breaks it up. And if you need a good example is the example from the Zen theme. If you already use Zen, then just look in it and there it is. And yeah, I'd advise you to look at Zen. Zen is pretty sweet, and you could probably get the idea from there. Don't mix front-end and admin theme styles. Oh, you know you can, right? You know you can, instead of admin CSS, you can put CSS. And that'll load both on the admin, like for the drag and drop thing, and it'll load on the front end. You know why that's horrible? Well, it's horrible for a lot of reasons. All of a sudden you had like overflow hidden on this column, and now panels is broken. And like you can't get all the way down to the little gear thing, because as it expands, it's cut off. Yeah, that sucks. So don't do that. Keep them separate. I keep a very, like a super lightweight admin CSS file that's specific to any panels layouts that need it. So if I've got a 3-column, I've got, float left, width equals 33% or whatever, with padding or whatever, just for the admin drag and drop. It doesn't have to match your front end. I mean, because your front end is very specific, but your back end doesn't have to be. As long as the person, the content editor that's using it understands like, hey, there's 3 columns. I see 3 columns here. All right, cool. I can drag one in the middle one and it'll show up on the front end. That's the main thing. And another byproduct of that too, like if you use the same CSS in the back end and front end, and then you go down the performance road of like, hey, I want to optimize stuff. Because it's loading that CSS file just for that panels layout, all of a sudden, and you're aggregating CSS, right? You are, right? Okay. Everyone should be. Aggregate CSS, right? Okay. Because you've got that CSS compressed and aggregated, it's going to be a different file between pages. So all of a sudden, the user visits your home page, loads CSS, cool. CSS is now cached. User visits any other panels layout page. Oh wait, I have to add in this other CSS file. I need a different CSS file that has that panels layout in it. So all of a sudden, like, the cache is busted. Now I have to download another one, which is like 85 to 95% the same file, but with this different panels layout. So bad news. Like, don't do that. I've actually recently I've been trying to optimize a website, and I ran into where the developer has selected one of the default panels layouts instead of a custom one for a different page or something. Like, they just needed a one column, so it's understandable, right? They're just like, all right, one column. Well, there's one column right here. I'll just use this one. It's still loading CSS, like, not, come on guys, not super, you know, it's not loading a ton of CSS, but it's loading that contrib panel CSS, and that will bust your cache. That sounds like something bad. But what you can do, and what I ended up doing, was unsetting the CSS for that panel's layout the same way that we discussed unsetting CSS earlier, which is just unset it within your template.php or one of the modules, and then copy and paste that into your actual theme. So nothing breaks, you still have it. And at the very top of the file, I usually put like, hey, I found this here. This is not mine. Don't blame me. It's got a ton of IDs on it. I don't know. But yeah, so if you took anything away from this, like that one and the theme debug, and you're welcome.
What's the benefit here of defining like a panel versus just having two regions? I mean, is there one?
A panel versus having two regions?
Left to the right region accomplish the same thing? Or
well, so in this case, the left part, there are different regions within the panel in which to drop stuff. So in this case, you could drop like the logo on the left side and then like the menu on the right side. And this, I believe, was used in a mini panel. So this is probably, the header there. So it just gives me different regions, and then I'm, floating that to the left and aligning it so I'm floating the other one to the right.
Regular regions in your theme, like block regions.
Oh, if you're using panels, then you probably just have one region called content, and so panels controls the rest of that. But yeah, I mean, if you used the non-panels everywhere, approach, then you could certainly do that. You could certainly put it just within region, then dragging stuff in there, and I've done that as well too. Yeah, I'm kind of like a less panels everywhere. Yeah. All right, so Drupal. Let's talk about the levels of acceptable. So there's the perfect world, right? We've got our partial name the same as the component name. We've got a BEM naming convention. Keep specificity as low as possible. Awesome. We've got the normal world where okay, at least we're able to get the partial name the same as the component name, right? We got breadcrumbs in there. At least we're trying to nest as little as possible and keeping it as non-specific as possible. But hey, I've got an LI in there because, it's life. And hey, at least it's namespaced, so we've got at least the breadcrumb thing in there. So I'm relatively sure that this won't apply anywhere else unless something else has the class breadcrumb. So that's kind of a good middle ground. And then there's at least we can grep for it world. So heaven forbid, oh man, we're going to use built-in Drupal classes. We're going to use views classes. Let's hope no one changes the view config. But I mean, basically, junk's got to get done. I hate it, but when stuff happens, stuff happens. Junk's got to get done. It is what it is, and at least we can grep for it. So that leads us into refactoring older projects. Yay! All right, so you get some fantastic Sass like this, and you're like, oh man, what am I gonna do? This is it's not fantastic. So what do? All right, don't do everything at once. That's a recipe for burning out, hating yourself. Don't do that. So instead, what we do is as we touch stuff, that's when we're going to deal with it. As someone comes to us or we decide to modify the slideshow, that's when we find the styles associated with the slideshow and pull them out into their own partial. And if you're using CSS and you're moving to Sass, or you would like move CSS to Sass, my friend and colleague Chris Doherty also has a blog post that talks about this as well. And it's basically just copy and paste the whole CSS file, change the extension .scss. Yay, Sass! And then as you touch stuff, cut and paste whatever you touch out into its own partial. So as you touch a slideshow, you know, cut and paste it out into its own thing. As you build new stuff, don't add on to the current, the big old file, you know, create a new component partial for it, you know, import that at the bottom of like all this legacy stuff. So as time goes on, and maybe you'll never get there, but at least it'll be easier to modify as you come back to it. Like, oh yeah, I had the slideshow stuff. Oh yeah, I've got that over there. Oh, I need to create something new. At least I'm not piling onto the problem. Add documentation and implement code standards as needed. So as you touch something, you can clean it up a little bit. I mean, if it didn't need to be an ID or need to be nested like 18 levels deep, well, now is a good time for that. And I will leave you with some more awesome resources, which are also part of my big old list of links. CSS Guidelines talk about like writing good CSS, not using IDs, basically, not using importance. Css Guidelines, which is very similar, but more Sass specific. We have our own CSS standards that are kind of a mix between the two. I mean, they're guidelines anyway. The Ben Frame article on 10 Commandments of Sane style sheets, those are awesome. Totally read that. It's really short. It's only 10 of them. CSS architecture for Drupal 8, and then Drupal.org, and that looks kind of weird because it wrapped. But anyway, so that just talks about the exact same thing I talked about here today. This is all implemented in Drupal 8. Like they already drank the Kool-Aid, and they're already going full SMACSS and BEM. So this isn't new. If you opened up one of the Drupal 8 themes, you should see something very similar. And BEM, SMACSS, and more, I've got that trick or link to the CSS tricks article on BEM 101. Fantastic. SMACSS, you can read the whole thing for free, or you can give the dude money for it. I'd recommend him giving him money because, hey, I like it. And then the other one, the BEM SMACSS advice for developers is fantastic as well. That's just people who are talking about like their experience working with it and any shortcomings or like what they found as they actually worked with it. And CSS Wizardry is always fantastic for like CSS and scalable, maintainable, modular CSS advice and blog post. And that's it, and that's more links to my stuff. So let's see how we do on time. That's not bad. And we got like 5 minutes, I think. And that clock is way off. We'll just keep going. I can talk shop all day. So we don't have, I guess a ton of time, but if anyone has any questions, and if we don't have time for it, that's fine too. You can hit me up later. I love talking shop. Not going to try to sell you anything. I just like to talk stuff. But any questions, thoughts, reactions? Want to see more code? Anything? Do you have a question? Any examples of the stuff in Drupal 8? I don't. I wish I had. I wish I should have downloaded it real quick and like, hey guys, look at this. But no, I don't. But I imagine you could probably download the beta now and check it out. You don't have to run it. You could just like look at the actual source and see what they're doing.
Question mark. Is this going to be online via that, or are you running a QuickTime movie by chance?
At the Yashi, I'm running with it.
I got PDF slides you could download. Oh, you mean this? Yeah. The actual video? Yeah, because there for us. I am not sure. I don't know. I wasn't sure if you're catching the movie. They should be catching it from there. Yeah, but this goes through there.
What I mean is they're catching what's on the camera, which is on the screen, which is kind of weak. So I was kind of
that's true.
I was kind of figuring
yeah, that would have been nice. I should do that next time. Nice. Good advice. Good advice. Now you got something doing your home. Yeah, man. Yeah.
And you can even put some pause tracks, laugh tracks, or whatever.
Nice. Yeah. And that's not a bad idea. I like that.
What is that before the one?
On the links before the one, there's an L, so it's L1. Yep. Cool. All right, guys. Thank you all very much for coming. Hope you learned something. You can clap, that's fine.